Welcome, everyone, to the midweek software strategy session. Today is the beginning of the month, June 2nd, 2020. My name is Stephen Vetterl, the risk manager that's going to talk about risk today. So I wanted to just do a quick check, if I may, please. You can type it into the use chat window if you want. Make sure you can see my screen and hear me okay. If you could just give me a quick yes, please, that would be great. You should be seeing the risk disclosure screen. Okay, good. Again, as everybody's coming into the presentation this morning, just run through the risk disclosure pretty quick. Keep in mind, I'm obligated by law to go through that. It may seem like a monotonous task each week, but just bear with me. We want our regulators to be happy, right? We want to be in compliance. It's actually a big part of kind of what I do here, and just making sure that, especially with the MyFX books that are just flying all over the place, you guys. I mean, some of them have done exceptionally well, especially with some of the beta tests on the products that we have coming out in the pipeline. But in some of these cases, it's for a short period of time. So I really would encourage everybody, don't get all jacked up on it and go around sharing all these numbers with everybody, because it really is getting into the I don't know. This is the area that the regulators hate the most, because it borders on sharing performance. It borders on promoting based on performance. Okay. Now I could talk a little more broadly, obviously, as the advisor here with the different licenses I have in the U.S., but please do not do that, because I can tell you this: a few people have been booted from the organization because they're out there just promoting all these FX books with some of these crazy returns. So just to highly advise against that. Make sure that in your weekly discussions with both your upline and downline teams, and I know some of you run some big teams, make sure that you communicate this in whatever language it needs to be, guys, because it's important stuff. We want to keep everything positive and moving along here. So risk disclosure, fun stuff. Trading foreign exchange markets carries high risk, which we're certainly seeing this week, and may not be suitable for all investors. So as I encourage everybody, as I'm reading through the rest of this risk disclosure, I'm going to release a poll as well. So keep in mind, from a compliance standpoint, Auvoria Prime does not have any recommended settings. We're not an advisory firm. We just license software that users can set up at their own risk and discretion. Software comes out of the box with default settings, and upon initial setup, you have the ability to customize these settings, change around however you want. Now, I highly suggest, before you even engage in that you set up a demo account and run it before you turn live money on. And a great example would be this week, especially if you're trading our favorite crazy pair of the Euro US dollar JPY ring, Euro JPY. It's taken a beating in the counts this week, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Also, keep in mind, the last 2 weeks I've had two special guests on that know an absolute ton about this, more so than I, although I'm getting more educated every darn day. There's a lot of stuff to dive through. So Tyler's presentation on Saturday was fantastic. It was essentially the explanation of high volatility settings, which we're certainly seeing today, and trading during high volatile times. So I would encourage a replay as much as necessary with that. That's important also on your weekly calls with your team, that you share that recording, make sure everybody has seen it and they understand what's going on. Because even though these setting flip-flops, which I'll go over just briefly today, would be effective in reducing risk, depending on the system that you're using and how many trades that you may have open, it may still be taking the previous settings. So please stay tuned when I get into a little deeper discussion of that. I'm also going to answer a couple of questions I got related to a couple of new features and settings inside the settings window of both Einstein and Alexander. So let's see if I covered all that. Keep in mind that all the settings that I talk about are not company recommended settings. So, and the same thing with all these accounts that we're going to be showing. I have a number of live accounts that we are in the process of getting hooked up to the different FX books, and a few of them are going to be live, and we're going to have different settings set up on them, running different rings as well as different sizes. So stay tuned. We have been in the process, and I'll tell you a big shout out to Patrick. He has just really worked a lot this weekend trying to get the corporate migration of the VPS over to our new company. So cheers to Patrick for putting in a tremendous amount of effort. My hat's off to you, brother. So let's go in. First thing I want to do before I move out of this risk disclosure screen is I want to launch a poll. So if you guys could please, this is the same poll that Jesse launched in his channel. I liked it a lot, so I decided to set it up. And let's talk a little bit about this. It helps me out with any of these polls if you guys answer honestly, okay? I mean, if you're just putting crazy answers out, then I'm not getting good data. Remember, everything with me is about long-term chunks of very good, high-quality data to form hypotheses on. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. With a lot of the accounts that we look at a lot, I mean, collectively, God, I think between myself and about 15 other experts in this field and the number of accounts, I think collectively we're probably all looking over about 50 different live and demo accounts. And this is not the accounts that are in beta, just regular accounts running different rings. So we're seeing a lot of different stuff coming up. We're getting a tremendous amount of good quality data going forward. But so far, I mean, hell, it's been a couple of months, so I haven't really been in this role that long. I mean, barely 2 months. So let me just end the polling here. Looks like we've got. So do me a favor. We've only got about 3/4 of the team that's on this call that have answered this poll. If you guys could just stop whatever you're doing, jump in, answer the poll before I make the stop the poll and turn off, show everybody the results. So the poll really is, for those that can't see maybe their screen, this is really just asking how much drawdown are you currently in, less than 5, 5 to 10, 11 to 15, or greater than 15. So I'm going to talk about that again. Do refrain from any questions today related to, and you're welcome to start asking questions if you want, but do not ask any questions about what's going on in Jesse's channel, okay? As you guys know, this is a small piece of the time I put in weekly. I have a very large financial advisory practice. It takes up well over 90% of my time in the course of a week. So I have not had in this week a chance to dive in really deep to what Jesse's doing. He's doing some fantastic stuff on the GBP NZZ side of the biz. But for now, I'm just sticking to the Euro JPY, Euro US dollar, and the US dollar JPY ring for now. So, okay, cool. All right, so thank you for voting. Let's end the polling here. Let me share the results. So it's got about 33% of the 100 people that are greater than 15%. This group I'm going to speak to today directly. And keep in mind, actually, hang on one second. Let me make sure we're sharing this screen. Yeah, here we go. So you should see the poll results right there now. So for the folks that are in greater than 15% drawdown, just understand with all of our top traders around the world that I've had the fortunate time to spend some quality time with, 15 to 20% is about the max that they want to see, essentially letting the rubber band stretch out to that point. So for some of the accounts that are greater than 15%, I think what we've found is that over the course of the last 2 weeks, especially ones trading the ring I spoke of, more specifically the Euro JPY, which has turned into a torturistic pair to be trading, that's where we're seeing the max amount of drawdown come in as far as that ring. So with our call over the weekend, what we did just generically, and I'm not going to get into too much detail because I'd rather not re-explain it again, which will force everybody to actually watch that broadcast, because I think Tyler did just an amazing job on that of explaining it. So please go back and watch that. But essentially, we flip-flopped two settings, and it made it more conservative during volatile times. And for those that are greater than 15%, my suspicion is for those accounts trading this ring is that many of the carryover drawdowns from that particular pair from the last 2 weeks are still trading based on the original settings that were placed. And I'll show the screen now so you can get a feel from what I'm talking about here in depth. All right, so this is the US, this is the Euro US dollar pair here. I'm just looking at this on a daily chart because, as you may have seen in previous discussions, we had a pretty big wedge forming on the daily. We broke from the wedge, which was essentially this move right here. Typically, when you break from a wedge, the first move is usually a fake out type of move. And then we came back down with inside the range, and it didn't really do anything until just recently. And then it just popped right back out. So, all right, so let me bring up these settings here. I'm going to address a couple other things related to some questions I got from the last 2 weeks as well, because there's a new setting in here. So for those asking about the must hedge positions before using dual sequence, I'll talk to that in a bit. Do keep in mind, as you guys are asking questions I'm seeing show up, I want the questions asked once the questions asked in the Q&A window, please. All right, so can everybody see? We seem to have some difficulty on seeing screen one. I've got like so many monitors. You guys seeing my Einstein settings window now? You seeing that okay? Okay, cool. All right. So these are the settings. And very simply, what Tyler talked about over the weekend was flipping the range multiplier to this position size multiplier and just flip-flopping these, okay? So turning one, and this is the more conservative setting for more volatile days like today, just flipping the 0.15 to 3.5 and flipping that again. Just going through some of these questions here. We flipped them. That's all we did. We flipped these two. It just makes it more conservative. I have not switched them over because I'm trying to keep these settings all the same going forward. Nothing's been changed since I want to keep this, at least as far as this small demo account's running. That way we can go through the FX account on fxblue.com. So what I did is I'm in the fxblue.com. If you have not seen the link to this yet, you can get the link to this in my channel. I can post it again for those that wish to see it, but you can scroll back up and see that. This is the fxblue.com account. This is one of only 2 websites that I know of out there that does a phenomenal analysis of verified trading and track record performance, dicing it up. I like to go in here and click on the orders window here and just click on open orders. Just been able to see it in a bigger screen. And as you can see on the top one I clicked here, the Euro JPY pairs, these are what's taken the suffering the drawdowns inside the accounts. So usually I get questions whenever I mention something like that. It's like, well, what do I do if I'm in drawdown? The key thing is to and maybe to address this more specifically, if you look at some of the accounts that we've been running over the last few weeks, we have seen some specifically who got in the Euro JPY trend and haven't been able to get out of it, and seen some accounts that have hit stop losses. So some things that we noticed on these accounts is that we saw two which had a Euro JPY chart open twice. I'm not really sure why that happened. That some accounts were running lower time frames than daily on this pair. So keep in mind as I jump back to the other screen. Hopefully you're seeing that screen. There we go. Whenever you move the settings window down, see this D1 right here? It just means you're trading on a daily time frame. So some of the ones we saw in big drawdown that were trading a smaller time frame. If in fact you do want to trade a smaller time frame, there are other settings for that. There are other pairs that can be traded. But as far as the out of the box settings, it's what you're seeing here. So higher risk, as there are possibilities for. We would also suggest anyone who is using any form of settings to tune into, obviously Saturday's call I mentioned where we explained high volatility settings and how to change those over. It's just essentially just flip-flopping these two. So I think where the confusion comes in is that these settings won't apply until the next sequence. So essentially when you get out of that set of trades. And it really is as simple as that. I'm going to close this settings window out. I'm actually going to show you that, which kind of dovetails into this new feature here that is the newest setting, which is must hedge positions before using dual sequence. And it's turned on to yes. This is nothing more than a more conservative way to hedge the sequence. So I'm going to explain a little bit about that once I've finished some of the notes I'm just reading through here. So really, this means if you're in a trend and you apply updated settings, you're changing the range multiplier to 1.35, and then you're adjusting below it the position size multiplier to 1.15, you have made a more conservative switch in the settings. And this is what Tyler and his team have been looking into pretty heavily. So if you're in a trend and you apply updated settings, again, it has to finish the trend sequence that it entered in order for the new settings to take place. So with some of the accounts that were in pretty big drawdown on this ring, these settings for the trades that were still firing off in the sequence were still based on the previous settings. That may be confusing to understand, and maybe that's something that can be addressed with the developers. But for now, that's something I just want everybody to be cognizant of. My phone is ringing. Just turn this down. Your phone never rings until you're on like 20 other calls, right? Right. What are some of the other notes I want to make? We also showed with these settings that the ability to increase the stop loss amount in pips and possibly remove them completely if you so choose, if you turn them off or increase them. So let's just re-review that. The position size multiplier in our high volatility settings, I have it highlighted on the screen here, would be set to 1.35. If someone chooses to do, and we'll explain this a little further as I get more familiar with this, but essentially you could turn off the stop loss if you're deep in it. You don't want the account, because oftentimes what happens is we get way down near a pretty significant drawdown. It starts hitting stops, and then it just snaps right back to where the trade had initially targeted that to move to go. So I've seen it time and time again in futures trading. So it almost begs and I think this is why a lot of our expert traders and some of the senior folks on our team wanted the developers to implement this change to the settings, essentially removing stop loss from trades. So I would not, and just understand this is an aggressive setting, I would not have this, you can just double click on it and turn it to yes, but I would not have it put on yes for the default settings. Just know that. Again, these settings are for educational purposes only. If you make changes to these outside of this, please know what you're doing and have tested it out first before you start changing all these around. I can't tell you how many times in our look back on accounts that have gotten beaten up both demo and live more sad in live account situations that these settings were all different from the default. The people that had these settings on, they did not understand what they did. In many cases, they didn't even run a demo account. So I have little sympathy for you guys if that in fact's the case, because you're basically going in blind. You're getting in an F1 race car and you're trying to fly around the track and win the race, and you don't even understand, how the car operates and how to operate the computer or any of the mechanicals, or even how to communicate with the pit crew. So it's important that in order to reduce risk, you understand what's going on with the settings. And if until you learn, just stick with the ones that are default out of the box. Now, the problem with the default is that with the 3-ring, at least my concern with the default that we're showing is that with this particular currency ring, the Euro JPY has just sort of been the bratty child in the 3. And I almost want to remove it because I just don't like how it's operating. So I haven't seen enough data to sort of make that final drop of the guillotine on that part of the pair ring. But, once you remove something, it changes the dichotomy of the data that the account's starting to produce. So you want to be careful in that until you have a good data set, a good team that sort of agrees with you on that. So that's kind of what I'm going to do. But stay tuned on that. All right, so we're 23 after the hour. I do want to answer some questions. Let me just peel through my notes here, see if there's something I'm missing. So it's better to always practice being on the conservative end of the fence and then trying to become conservative once you are worried. So essentially, and I don't know, this was the first week where, we decided to make this change to a higher volatility, more conservative settings. And then the question really can always be asked by anybody, well, how do I know which week to turn it on and turn it off? I don't have the answer for you guys at this point. I can't foretell the future, okay? All we can do at this organization, with the tremendous amount of effort a lot of people are putting in to getting this stuff right. I mean, I've never seen a more conservative effort in my entire life as far as an amalgamation of brain power peeling through data to come up with the right settings for the right pairs, given whether you want to be aggressive or conservative, and the size of the account. So with that being said, let's just take a quick peek into the news. I know that I saw a few questions on that. So I always make sure you check your date here. So we're essentially into Tuesday morning. By the way, all these times right here are Pacific time. Okay. So if you're seeing these time delays and it looks different, it's because it's Pacific time. So I think what's happening is I think the news is just being absorbed. There's a lot of currency pairs that have broken out from trends or sort of ranges that they been into tight range, especially with the Euro US dollar, that are essentially breaking out in that. As far as just broad, as some from overseas don't know, there's a lot of really ridiculous rioting going on in this country, in my opinion, for really no good reason at all. And it's just causing a lot of disruptions in local governments. I mean, heck, here in SoCal, we've actually had curfews instituted by the counties, where you get dinged on your phones ringing and it tells you about a curfew. So things are just a bit wacky. Obviously, a lot of this is related to some events that took place inside this country, but a lot of the other stuff is just really a lot of geopolitical unrest related to pandemic and a number of offshoots to come off that. So with that being said, coming into Wednesday, you can see the ADP non-farm employment change. This is just a pre-release, if you will, or a peek inside of what could be a pretty bad unemployment rate. I know that a lot of the PMI numbers a little earlier this week actually weren't that bad. So as far as equity markets, at least domestically here in the US, they've been acting pretty good. Do keep in mind they're still being propped up by the central bank here. but they seem to be doing pretty well. So this press conference tomorrow, so I probably, if you guys are, and maybe there are some in this position, if that's the case, Godspeed. If you have a positive return in your accounts coming into Thursday, I would probably turn off the trading system just because the CCB press conference, I think, can bring additional volatility into the mix. For, again, those, I mean, we're past, once we get past Tuesday, we're still coming into a lot of red folder events on Wednesday that could affect things. So, but inevitably, I'll go through the questions here in a bit. One of the questions would be like, I'm in drawdown, what do I do? So my first answer to all of those questions is going to be, what do your settings look like? Do they look like the settings that you see on my screen? And let me just make sure. You guys are seeing those settings again. Let me shift back. So these are the settings. Notice I have not changed these settings to the high vol. Okay. Now I was not in this account in drawdown. Let me just close this out and show you guys here. I was not in drawdown coming into this week. So if we go back to the Euro US dollar, let's open back up the window. But my account's getting kind of battered because of the Euro JPY portion of that currency ring. And, you know, hey, maybe I should have switched over the settings too, because I figured it's going to be a volatile week. I figured we were about to, at least in the Euro US dollar, where I do most of my technical analysis, I figured we'd pretty much look at, you know, staying within inside this range here. I actually didn't really expect us to break out a bunch. And if we did, I would have expected it to fake out, so to drop back under the 99.90 area was my anticipation. And it is basically up running stops, if you will, because there's probably a mass load of trades up above this level, essentially above a pretty important range around the 1.1047 area. So what else do I want to address? So here is the FX blue account. Whoever raises their hand, you guys, I rarely look at the hand raising stuff. So just put your questions inside the Q&A window, please. All right, so you can see the returns on the accounts. Total return so far, 6.6%. That's with taking the battering today of the minus 6.2% that it's been trending around. It was actually down as much as -4, which isn't really that bad. So, because usually the questions when you see stuff like this in your accounts come something like, well, what do I do? I'm in drawdown. And, you know, I always will first ask, you know, where do you have the settings? You know, if that's all default settings, you know, have you run a demo account before? You're running live money. It is money you cannot afford to lose, things like that. So if in fact it is money you cannot afford to lose, you probably should not be trading it live. And ideally with the 3-ring strategy, even the default settings out of the box that we're showing on either Alexander or Einstein, I personally think you should be running an account of at least $2,000 live on that. So if you can't, I certainly would save up to get to that point first, because you can't tolerate on some of these smaller accounts this kind of drawdown. It'll blow the account out if you get to a level 5 or certainly level 6 on some of these currencies, especially if you're trading more than 2 pairs, which we would not recommend trading 3 pairs for $2,000. So I know there's people out there doing that. If you are trading just 2 pairs with $2,000 or less, again, that's a more conservative setting than bringing in the 3rd pair, being more aggressive. So just as a side note, I probably sound like a broken record and all this stuff, but there are people each week to continue to hear this for the first time, so I think it needs to be said. All right, so let me just check my notes. I'm going to jump into questions here. And a lot of these questions are related to a lot of the stuff that we covered on the previous 3 weeks calls, guys, on Saturday. I'm seeing probably a good 20% of these questions related to that. So if you guys have not seen the previous week's presentations, I will default to you on that, please. All right. So bear with me a second here. Let's go down to the bottom part of this FX Blue account. If you guys want to take a look at some of this data, I would encourage. You can always go in and look at this for yourself. You can click on analysis. You can drop down in these windows. You can dice this type of data up any way you want to see it. And we're going to get the other accounts hooked up to my FX book, which just allows you to drill down into a little more of the deeper data and get into specifics around win rates per currency, things like that, which is the most important to me, is the win rates. And then next most important of is the risk settings that you have. All right, so let me jump into Q&A. Lots of good questions here, you guys. I like this. Okay, so first question, second question, third question. And let me actually make sure we're seeing this right screen. There we go. So the first question is asking the same thing. What do we do when we're in drawdown? The key thing is if it's a demo account, then you can certainly learn from the drawdown and the settings that you have. So the next question is Euro JPY had a 460 pip move without retracement on D1. How is this software going to handle when I leave money on the market? Not sure what you mean by that, Mauro. Can you restate that? So maybe a discussion of this would help a little bit as well. Let me just bring up. So this is the settings window. I'm going to show you guys down here below it. You can actually see some of the trades that have executed on the Euro JPY. So if you're looking at the bottom of my MT4 screen, if you cannot see the screen, just pop it up in chat that you can't see it. Let me know via chat. So this software takes 4 types of trades. If you're looking at the bottom of the screen here, actually, let me just close this so I can show this to you guys here. So looking at the bottom of the screen, you can see the trades. Some are still live, some are rolling. The software executes 4 different types of trades. It executes a sell counter and a sell trend, okay? And it'll also execute a buy trend and a buy counter. Now, without getting into a deeper dive on what types of trades these are, just know that it's covering it from a 4 different types of trades perspective. And when you have a number of sell counters, like hopefully you can see here on the lower side, you've opened up essentially 4 levels right here of a sell counter on the Euro US dollar. In order for you to open up a buy counter, you need to put in a hedge. And that's essentially what this new setting is right here. So let me just restate that because I've gotten a bunch of questions on this. And right now, until we have someone come on and talk about a deeper dive, I would leave that at yes. Must hedge positions, which is the default setting. So once the software has you a number of levels deep into a trade, and remember with every level, 0 is considered a level. So this is 4 levels we've opened up right here. With every level, the software essentially is taking it a larger size trade. You can see these 0.01s, larger size. It's basically as we get deeper into this particular sell counter, or the one it was in, or any sell counter that it's pulling for, it's getting more confident that it's right. That's why it's putting on larger trades. Okay. So the must hedge position before using dual sequence is essentially what that new setting is. So if you turn that setting off, okay, it's not hedging, it's sequence. And there will be times and variations of different types of expert advisors that we come out with and we have in beta test that, we may not want to have that hedge on as a yes. We may want it no, since you could just double click in the window and change it to no. Okay. But for right now, with these default settings and the drawdown everyone's in, I'm not willing to, for the current sequence we're in, essentially, right? We're in drawdown. I'm not willing to step in front of and pretend that I'm smarter than the software, because I'm not. And I recommend you do the same, because I've heard all kinds of stuff in Telegram chat windows and emails sent to me about people turning on and off. You're just tinkering with it. And you're basically saying I'm smarter than the software. And I'll tell you, a few of you out there, you have the ability to recognize a trend not working. So maybe you want to take more risk off the table, but without getting into a ridiculously deep technical analysis educational series, which would go way over the heads of many of our subscribers. The smart thing to do is to make sure the settings are conservative and let the software do its work. Note that one of the things I did say, which is more of along the lines of past performance is no indication of the future, right? But the software, as always, throughout the last almost 10 months I've been paying attention to it, has almost always, with the exception of a few times, pulled itself out of a downtrend. May have taken some time, but it's pulled itself out. It's essentially traded itself out of a hole, which is nothing different than any large hedge fund or a trading organization would do when they don't want to take losses, right? Because oftentimes you see an overwhelming amount of time, if you take the loss down where a particular point is, you're essentially getting out at the bottom. Oftentimes it will take some time for that pattern to play out. And usually you're proven right if you're an expert. It bounces back with inside of whatever type of pattern you're trading. So if you're trading within a particular range, right, just essentially we're trending and bouncing along a particular trend or a range area, whether that's up, down, or sideways, you want to look to see it break out. Now, in this particular case, we're breaking out from a rather sloppy looking wedge on the Euro US dollar daily chart, right? But now we're beginning to get some real good push up towards an area we haven't seen in some time. And that's causing some consternation among some of the traders I'm talking with. But that's actually not the problem inside Einstein and Alexander this week. It's that damn JPY euro. It's just nuts. So anyway, let me go into some rest of these questions here. And I would encourage you. I'll tell you, maybe somebody can tell me this as an answer. All you Zoom experts out there, is there a way that I can go in and download all these questions out of Zoom? So if somebody knows the answer to that while the Zoom meeting is live, if there's some way to sort of enable that, that would be awesome. I don't know how to do it. I don't even know if it's doable. But just if you guys know how to do it, get in touch with me. Tell me how to do it. What events, news, and such should pay attention? So this is a good question that should apply to everybody. What events, news, VIX, etc. VIX is just a volatility index. Should we pay attention to in order to decide to use high volatility settings or normal settings? So I think what we probably need to do, and we have not built that into a process yet for my channel or the Jesse's channel or any of the other channels that are out there, of sort of saying, hey, we should have normal settings on this week versus having high volatility settings. For now, my recommendation to the group is to have the high volatility settings on for the foreseeable future. Unless you are an individual that can afford the big swings in the account looking for more return, which is obviously a more aggressive stance, right? So that would be my advice to the group. Just remember though, if you switch over those settings and we're flip-flopping, again, right here, we're flip-flopping range multiplier to the setting that position size multiplier has, and we're flip-flopping position size multiplier to the range multiplier. That's a more conservative settings, which also means if there's lots of volatility, you may, not always, but you may not have the potential or as much potential for drawdown, right? But also, you may not have as much potential for a gain on the other side. Let me just peel through some of these questions. Cool. So thank you for that. Looks like somebody's found a potential way for us to download the questions. Because I'll tell you, if I could download this, this would be a lot easier. When it comes into Q&A, it could just be like 15 or 20% of these questions last week were based on this. Let's just answer it as a whole. Also, should we consider changing the settings during a day as things like news or events? You'd probably, Mark, want to have just change the settings at the beginning of the week instead of going crazy, like switching them around every day, right? Unless you truly are. Yeah, and I'll tell you, then this next question, you bring up a good point. I'm missing the trend levels before hedging setting. I noticed I'm missing that here. So maybe we could have Patrick or someone assist me with that. You know, I actually restarted the VPS because I noticed that wasn't there, but it has not shown up. So thank you. In switching the range multipliers to a conservative setting, or only for Euro JP1, you can switch them for. So right now, these settings, you can just switch them to conservative for the Euro JPY, whereas, you know, I totally want to get rid of that part of the pair ring. I know that's probably going to send a lot of people's heads spinning, but it's just, things just been junk. And it happens, guys. I mean, there always becomes products to trade out there in the world that are just, they turn into just crap because they just don't perform well. And then they come back in favor at some point. You know, oil, gold, they've all had their day in the sun, and then they've been hated. When you say settings won't change until next cycle, does that mean until those trades close out, or does that mean until not till the next week? It's till the particular sequence is finished. Whether the sequence unfortunately gets stopped out and you're out of the sequence, which is nothing more than a group of trades that are set to be placed given these parameters, right? So with a lot of the settings, we have the ability in, if you're looking at my screen here, max number of levels to go 8 levels deep. So with the screen below, and I'm just showing a very small sampling of a whole mess of trades, but you know, it has the ability to go 8 levels deep. In this particular subset, you know, we went 4 levels deep with the sell on the Euro US dollar counter, but it wanted to buy counter, but it needed to do a little buy trend first as a hedge, which just helps protect that. There's varying degrees of opinions on this, by the way. So as we get deeper into the data, you know, as I always try to do, you guys, I'll probably bring an expert in that can just talk about that. Get me educated on it as far as deep dive as well. What about those that are trading one pair? I have my settings recommendation, and I'm a severe drawdown at this time. So again, you know, if you have the ability to withstand the drawdown and it is live money, I would tell you stick with that. Let the software dig its way out. Okay, the range multiplier and position multiplier set to the same value, which I've been told is conservative. Not sure where you're getting that from, Courtney. I have not seen it where they'd be set the same. Doesn't mean you can't, but I haven't seen the data on it yet. And by the way, there's no dumb questions, Nicholas. Ask away. You guys will begin to see that there's going to be stuff that I get mixed up on in this too. That's why these calls are forcing me to drill down into each of these settings from pros and cons and be able to use examples. So last week I was able to trade with trade option notifications with Alexander. This week, even with my settings for each Forex pair set and my MT4 quotes ID listed in the notification settings, I'm still not getting any new trade notifications from Alexander. Did I do something wrong? Put in a ticket, if you would, Nicholas, to the back office, but maybe restart your VPS first. Make sure the software is logged into the brokerage account, being demo or live. Those are things I would all check on first. If it looks like it's active, it should, if you do those first two things, you should be able to get the software up and running. If not, so you notice a lot of these questions are all related to things like, I'm nearing my stop loss. Should I take the stop loss since it may retrace? A lot of times it does retrace. It may not retrace this time, and I may look completely stupid on this call, right? It's possible. But I'm not willing to step in front of it at this point. Okay, so this is actually good advice from Dan. Steve, love your call. First time I've been on, and I've been using this and the older versions of the bot since August, and I doubled my account through steady compounding. My advice would be to start and stay conservative. Survival is everything in Forex. Very well said, Dan. Let compounding take care of the profits. My starting range is different than I've had no trouble with EJ at all recently. Do me a favor, Dan. Send a screenshot of your settings window. We're always trying to compile data, my good man. So if you could email that stuff to me. If you don't know my email address, it's svetteral. Somebody wants to type it in the I don't know, I guess you guys can't really type in and show everybody, can you? Somebody type it into the chat for me and make it to the audience. It's svetteral at auvoriaprime.com. I'd like to see that, Dan. Thank you. And I'll let me just make it. The other thing you can't do as a panelist, and you can't copy somebody's question out of Q&A. It just drives me nuts. And get that FX Blue to me as well, Dan, please. Thanks. I was told 3 pairs of 1,500. Gabriel, there's lots of misinformation going out there, and it doesn't mean you can't trade 3 pairs of $1,500. I would just have it on 2 or 1 to start. Great question, Jacqueline. I have no clue. When do you personally think EJ will turn around? My crystal ball, unfortunately, is in the shop. I do not know the answer. Can we get the software changes to be waived for using a demo account? Can we get the software charges to be waived for using a demo account? No. What should we do if there's no retracement on drawdown? It's a good question. What should we do if there's no retracement on drawdown? I mean, and this looks like you're an anonymous attendee. There almost always is. I can offer that to you at this point. But there'll always be that time where something that you think is going to happen doesn't. Next question's good. Is it a good idea to keep the must-hedge positions before using dual trades? Yes. And unless you are exceptionally experienced with the software and the settings, and you're running different kinds of pairs, you know the software well, I would not at this particular time, until even I get more educated on some of the different settings we can change. You're welcome to take a look at Jesse Kamer's channel. I don't know if you guys are subscribed to our channels, but I would highly suggest, if you're not, download Telegram, get the app for your phone or the desktop, and subscribe to, at the very least, the Auvoria Prime official channel, my trade tracking with Steve Vetterl, and then the trade tracking with Jesse Kamer as well, Kammer. two completely different strategies being presented by both of us, both trading different rings. Both will be trading an amalgamation of live and demo accounts. Is it normal to have, Chris asks, is it normal to have a 28% drawdown? For sure, I seriously look at my settings. I hear everyone's only having 6 to 8. So my settings are normal. They haven't changed. And, I'm in, where am I now? I'm in about a 5.5% loss so far this week. But I was actually up a couple of percentage points coming into this drawdown, so it's not as bad. So you really have to take a look, Chris, to see what your settings are. Also, another thing, here's the broken record again. The other thing we noticed with a lot of these accounts we're looking at is that there's been a lot of slippage from some of these live accounts running on brokers we know nothing about. And I don't have the time to get into it right now because we're running up on an hour call, but make sure you get to view what Tyler said about dealing with different brokers out there. A lot of the ones I saw, pictures sent to me via email, there's been some pretty big games played, and I addressed that directly on my channel inside some of these live accounts of these different brokers we don't know. If a martingale system placing sell trades when no retracement is happening, I start doubting about the software. Okay, thank you, Mauro. Should I take trades from Euro, US dollar, and not from JPY for the time being? It depends, Gabriel, about the size of your account. Is it wise to manually close out trades that make a profit? Yeah, I mean, you certainly can do that, But again, even on the upside, one could also say, well, if I'm in a profit, we can certainly close out the week. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a conservative stance, There is also that chance that you closed out for the week, that the software can continue to do well. When you say you're turning the software off, so why do your EA settings still have those days on? Well, I'm not changing anything as far as the default settings inside the account. They are, it is basically, this account is set on a trailing equity and it's set to close out Thursday morning at 10 a.m. That's Eastern time. So Leroy is saying, yes, it will save the chat alongside the recording. Okay, so we really need to look into that. All right, now, so David's one of our experts here, guys. David says, new trend levels before hedging setting, made to restrict double trades with it. Example, by setting trend levels, which I don't have on my screen, by the way, I gotta figure that out. So the example is by setting trend levels before hedging to 9, max levels +1 levels, and max levels to 8, hedged before dual sequence to yes. This way you will completely restrict double trades. You'll also restrict hedging as well. It's better like that than having double trades. So, okay, well, I'll get that from you guys in my Telegram chat. Somebody could drop that into one of the private chats I'm in. I'll post that to the trade tracking with the Steve-O channel. So here's a question for you, Patrick. Why are you still on the old VPS? I don't know the answer to that. So not really sure, guys. I've been buried with client meetings the last couple of days. I haven't really had too much of a chance to dive in and do a deeper dive other than just this ring on these default settings. Should we close out our losses? I already answered that. So remember that Tyler's presentation indicated that switching those two settings still gets similar comparable results to the default settings, but it has a much greater risk mitigation. Okay. So, and maybe I misspoke about that earlier. So that's essentially the real benefit. And thank you for that, Sean. Gets similar comparable results to the default settings, but has a much greater risk to mitigation. I'll tell you for what it's worth, guys. The deeper I look into this, and many of you on that do this full time have had a much bigger opportunity to look into this than I have had. So kudos on getting me the information on this. But seems to me for the foreseeable future, I should be flip-flopping these two. So I may decide to do that today. Okay, sorry, that's what you recommend. So Rotex asks for a 5K account, what starting lot size will you recommend? Keep in mind, guys, here, let's see if I can copy this. Oh, cool. Figured this out. All right, so up in the window here on my screen, there's my email address. So as some are probably sick of hearing me say, if you send me an email, I need a screenshot of your whole settings window, and I need, if possible, your account's hookup to either FXBlue or MyFXBook. That way I can look through the settings and see what's going on relative to the performances taking place. Okay. So if you can grant me access and or screenshots to that, that is where it would be most helpful for me to answer your question. Make sure your question is complete, well thought out, and I can read it. So next question here, because I'm going to end this here in about 3 minutes. So my first visit to the room, thank you for training in time. You're welcome. The question would be doing similar sessions that would perhaps show the process from the beginning. So for that, this question here, Atusa, love the name, by the way, this is great. Start watching all of my calls from the beginning, because even for experts, there's some nuggets that you're going to pick up along the way. There's going to be in some of my first calls, I was kind of stumbling through some of the settings and so forth because I'm learning too. I'm getting much better, but you're going to be able to pick that up from that rather than me just having to start from square one. We also have a settings video series that we have shot, that actually Tyler shot, that I really think should be up in the back office, in my opinion. Maybe it's something I'm going to need to shoot from a compliance standpoint. If that's the case, I've already done a series one of that. Maybe we can put some more time and effort into getting that up in the back office. But we hear you on that. Let's see. This is the first time I lost this much. It's just a bad week. Yeah, I mean, Nathan, it is. I mean, it happens. It's part of Forex. And I guess this would be much easier for all of us collectively as a group if we were up 50% in our accounts, and then you added a 15 or 20% drawdown. It'd be more easy to stomach, right? But being able to see on the horizon of the light at the end of the tunnel is just as important in any kind of trading, and not being too myopic, looking too much at the short term. I try and stay away from that and focus on the long term. It's my best advice. It'll help you, get through some of these downtrodden times as well. I'm not able to set myself. I'm getting a lot of VPS questions, guys. I don't know how to answer any of that stuff. That's Master Patrick's realm. I've been using the software since the old version. I've been using the software since the old version. I've had great results. So I'm familiar with it, but at the moment, I'm stuck 20% EJ drawdown with default settings. I'm not in any other trades. How should I go about managing this? Let it climb itself out. Juan, I thought that with the new parameter of trend levels before hedging set to 2, the EA would only start opening sell by count. Don't know how to answer that one yet, Juan. Stay tuned or re-ask that question to me in some form, please. Because that new setting, I don't even have on my system yet. So the remove stop loss of trades should be a no. Where is that question? Yes. No. Cool. Look at that. I made it to the end. 61 questions. All right. So, top of the hour. Today, again, the 2nd of June. If your questions were not answered, I would encourage you to ask them again. I only have so much time in the day, folks. I do thank you for entertaining me with these good questions. Keep them coming. Some of these questions can also be asked to your up and down line if you were dealing with, as I've come across, some fantastic folks on both sides of the spectrum. So for this week, my advice, just from an emotional standpoint, don't get too caught up in it. Don't be, grinding yourself in it. Don't be lamenting too much. Let your heart not be troubled, as I often like to say. I will be here Saturday. Do keep in mind, just as far as future planning, the was it 27th? 27th at the end of this month. I will not be hosting a Saturday call. Maybe the executive team is going to have somebody fill in for me, but I am on vacation the last week of June. So do note the 27th Saturday of June, I will not be hosting a call. And with that being said, everyone, Steve Federal, I'm off the mic. Have a great week.